Welcome to another episode of the Genius Podcast. My name is Karen Doyle, your host and founder of the Genius Project, an initiative for Catholic women designed to support and resource you towards growth in all areas of your life, spiritual, personal, and professional. We seek to do this through the Catholic Women's MasterClass, the Genius Podcast, which you're listening to, and our online courses and other resources. You can find out more about any of these initiatives at our website, www.geniusproject.co, or come and follow us on Instagram, genius_project_daily. And you can also watch the live recordings of these podcasts on our Genius Project YouTube channel. On this week's episode of the Genius Podcast, I'm talking to a very beautiful person who I met many years ago, I think back in 2006 possibly, the very beautiful Corinne Lindsell. Now, Corinne is going to share a little bit about her story, how she was able to navigate trauma and loss. And sometimes it's really hard to know how to get through these experiences. And the book she's written, Learn to Fly, is really this companion. It's a book that gives permission to people to feel their grief and then to give them some goalposts and navigate complex grief and trauma. So I hope and pray that this episode is a blessing to you. Well, Corinne, welcome to the Genius Podcast. It's lovely to have you joining us today. You're based in Sydney, so we're not too far away from each other, but great to have you.
Thank you. Thanks, Karen. Really nice to be here.
Yes, well, you and I go back quite a long way. I was actually trying to think when we first connected, and I think you might have been a youth minister or something in a parish. Is that when we first connected?
Yeah, it was. I think it was in the lead up to Sydney World Youth Day.
Okay, so that's 2007, 2008.
Yeah, and so it was, I think you came and did a talk around, I can't even remember.
It was around relationships, I think.
Yeah. Theology of the body stuff,
yes.
yeah.
That's right. So, and then we've sort of woven in and out of each other's lives.
Before your children, I even think.
It was,
yeah.
Yes. Yeah, so we had Olivia in August of 2007. So it must have been, It was prior to that because I wasn't pregnant. So it could have even been 06.
Yeah.
A bit of history there.
Yeah, just a little.
Yeah, well, it's so nice to see your face, and you're such a beautiful person, and my life's been blessed just by the conversations, interactions we've had over the years, and I know everyone who meets you comes away feeling that from your presence. But before we dive into today, I'm wondering if you can share a little bit about your background.
Mm-hmm. Sure, yeah. I grew up in the Sutherland Shire in Sydney, and a very devoted Cronulla Sharks fan, I must say. I now live in Penrith, which is I don't think anyone saw that coming, that I'd leave the Shire. But yeah, no, Sydney. I went through school. I went through up to year 12. I did a degree in social work. And then later on, I've done a master's in social change and community development.
Yeah.
But my whole working life has been around what I dub the helping profession. And so I started working in disability support work when I was in year 12. And that kind of led me to a very interesting path and took me overseas. I did a stint at a summer camp for special needs kids and the New Jersey foster kids over in the States. And it was the hardest work that I think I've ever done.
Why was that?
Because I think what I saw I think it was the foster system over in New Jersey at that time was incredibly broken. And very unfair. And we had kids who they were siblings and they wouldn't see each other throughout the year because they're fostered elsewhere, and then they'd have various difficult relationships with their siblings at camp because they knew that if they got close they have to separate again. So it was just constant heartbreak and constantly seeing this pain. But it was these young people that really stayed with me, even though I was there with the skill set that I had for the special needs and the disabilities. It was the foster kids that stayed with my heart, and I knew coming from that I needed to get into youth work.
Okay.
And so that, so I did some studies, just some basic studies around youth work and what have you. And I ended up becoming a youth minister for 10 years in my local parish, and really looked at that a little bit holistically as well. And it was at the time that youth ministry wasn't even a thing in parishes in Australia. Yes. And so there were probably 3 of us in Sydney, and, you know, we connected quite well, and we knew each other very well, and we supported each other because we were developing this ministry model, really. And so I did that for a decade, and then worked in various areas in social work as well. And probably one of the most insightful jobs that I had done, which molded my, I guess, the church work and the social work stuff, was a role that I had with the National Council of Churches in Australia around their Safe Church program. And that was auditing safeguarding training in different Christian denominations. And it was in the time of the Royal Commission into institutionalized abuse. And it was incredibly eye-opening. But what I saw was a sheer determination to be doing the right thing and to be, you know, going forward and moving forward in some progressive and reforming ways. So that was really eye-opening. But yeah, and I landed a role almost 10 years ago now in Vinnie's, where I am still today. And I've had various different roles within Vinnie's, but yeah, I'm still, it's definitely been my employment of choice for the last 10 years. So I've gone from casework to management, and now I'm in what I like to call organizational leadership, and where my role is the mission and pastoral care partner for the St Vincent de Paul Society. And this is about kind of bringing the purpose of the organisation through the organisation. Fantastic. So embedding that with staff and volunteers. And it's taken me into various different avenues, and
such a journey. And it's interesting looking all the way back to your experience in New Jersey. Those seeds of just what you were going to do with your life have been consistent, even though what you've done has looked a little bit different.
Yeah, and that's true. And that's what attracted me to social work, to be honest, because it was such a broad qualification that you could go in so many different ways. Right. You know, you could go down the health road, you could go down the government road, the not-for-profit, homelessness, counselling, all sorts of things. So
gives you that variety. I was a bit the same with nursing. It was general, but you could sort of choose different areas.
That's it. Yeah,
that's fantastic. Well, and interestingly, recently, and this is sort of why I invited you on the podcast, is you published your first book.
Yes.
And I'd love for you to tell us a little bit about that, because you have this background in social work, but you also have your lived personal experience, which I guess has brought you to a place of writing this book to be a gift to others. You went through a great tragedy, you and your family, some years ago now, and that journey, I guess I connected with you, I think maybe a year after that happened, and we've had a few conversations. So when I saw that you published your book, I just feel so proud of you. I just want to say huge congratulations, because it is such a gift, and we haven't even talked about what it's about yet. But I will let you share your story. The book is Learn to Fly, and it's just looking at complex grief and helping adults navigate that journey. But would you share a little bit about, I guess, your own journey and what led you to writing that book?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, thank you for your words about the book as well, because it really is something that I'm incredibly proud of too. It's the most significant thing that I've done in my life to date, and I think it is the most significant thing that I've done because of the sentiment behind it. And also what I've been able to see happen with it so far. And so I launched Learn to Fly this year, and it took me probably a couple of months to write it, which is bizarre in the writing world, but it took over 2 years for it to come together. So I had the book written, and then the whole process afterwards. It's a self-published book, so the illustration journey, and then the kind of book design and getting it all together. It took quite a long time, which was a bit unexpected on my end, but I learned a lot. So the book itself, thank you, as you said, it's called Learn to Fly, and it is a book designed to, I guess, do 2 things, to allow people who are grieving to have, I guess, an avenue for their grief. It's a real permission-giving book, around, your grief is your grief. But it's also a book that's almost like an education tool for people who might not know the right things to say or how to be and things like that, which I think we find ourselves in that position all the time. And I know I definitely was probably that person before I had my own personal experience with grief. You mean well and you don't know, what you don't know. So this is one of those books that really does try and help both players in the grief journey. So I guess what led me to write the book, as you mentioned, that our family had suffered some incredibly traumatic loss with the loss of my brother. So my brother was 39 years old. And he was in a relationship with his partner. It was on again and off again. And he was murdered by her. And that just kind of spiraled into the most traumatic experience that we have ever gone through as a family and as individuals. And his house was set on fire, and his house was actually on the same property as my parents' place. So they saw it all unfold. And so their grief is, their trauma, I should say, is really horrendous. And we ended up going through a homicide investigation, and that was tumultuous, and that was just horrific in itself. And that process itself in the legal system, Jeffrey died in 2017 in October, and our murder trial wasn't until February 2022.
Wow.
Sorry, 2020.
Wow.
2020. And so that just goes to show that length of time that it takes. And it took them 8 months to arrest her. And that was really, really difficult for us because we obviously didn't know what she was capable of. And so we were incredibly scared for our own lives and, what might have happened next. But we in the end, she spent 4 months in prison, and then she was released on bail. And then that again kind of shook us quite a lot. And it took us right up to January of 2020, when we were preparing ourselves to go to trial. We had a lot of prepping by, just the legal people around us. And obviously we weren't represented at all. It's definitely not us in the court system, but all of us were giving statements in the court case. And there were so many different elements to the legal journey, and various different appearances in court. And we attended every single court mention, and so did a number of his friends. And it's one of those things that you're literally mentioned in court. It's called a mention, and you're mentioned. The case is mentioned, and whoever's kind of dealing with it just escalates it to the next level. It just has to go through this system. So from local court all the way to the Supreme Court. And so we went there, and all these mates were there each time. And it was just such a witness of who Jeffrey was to everyone, and just that great power. But came to January 2020, and we're all breathing down the neck of COVID. None of us knew, because our lockdown happened in March. So our trial was scheduled for February 2020. And what happened was we had a knock on the door by our detectives, and they came to us and said, look, there's not going to be a trial. And we didn't know why. And at first thought, we were thinking maybe she's pleaded guilty, and it's going to be settled out of court or something like that. And he said, no, actually, she was found dead last night. So she took her own life just before
realize that part
we
of the
were.
story.
Yeah, so just before we were meant to go to trial. And what that did for us was added more trauma,
Absolutely.
to our story and to Jeff's story. It meant we couldn't have our day in court. It meant justice for Jeff was just so far away once again.
Yeah.
And how do you unpack that again? Like, how do you make sense of all of this? And the biggest take home for me from that is she once again took control of the outcome. And we just felt so incredibly lost. And it was just one of these things of like, well, now what? We've got all this energy to build up for justice for my brother. And where does that go? What's going to happen with that? So it has been incredibly complex, incredibly layered, incredibly traumatic. And I personally have separated two things in my brain, and I don't know how it happened, but I have lost my brother.
Yes.
That's one thing. And our family has gone through a homicide. And I haven't combined the two, and I'm sure I will one day, but I just think that's too painful.
Yes.
So somehow my brain has split them. And so I can talk to both very differently. I can talk about the loss of my brother and the grief of losing my brother. And I can also talk about the events that happened that night and everything that happened after that as well. So yeah, it's definitely been a very hard journey, and it's something that I guess you don't know how you're going to deal with it. It's the worst possible thing to go through. And it's one of the most heinous things to have happened, and people around you also don't know how to deal with it either, and don't know how to be. So that's pretty much how the book came to be, because it really was a matter of in the midst of the pain that I was in, there were a lot of people who wanted to help and wanted to say the right things. And sometimes they just said the wrong things or really dumb things. And you're just like, oh, and it hurts. And you just, I had this mantra of they mean well, they mean well, they mean well, because you have to protect yourself. And you're going, everything's different, everything's slower, everything's changed. And for me, I definitely felt a fundamental shift in me, because everything that I identified as being a social worker, being a Christian, being a sister, being a daughter, all of that had to be redefined for me. I had to really, really assess if I still wanted to be in social work and this sort of work, considering the complexities of now that I'm dealing with my own trauma and how that came to be. And knowing everything I know about domestic violence and the narrative around domestic violence being around violence against women, but what about male victims and female perpetrators and just all of that? So it was a very, very confusing time. And whilst I've got two brothers, so Jeffrey is the one who passed away, and Nathan, my other brother. So I'm still a sister, but it just had to shift, and that relationship and those relationships had to shift. And just being a daughter, like I had to almost care for my parents,
become carer,
and being the youngest, and kind of having that responsibility, of, and it wasn't put on me, but it evolved to be that.
That's right. Yes.
And so so everything, and just concepts of of my faith just was shattered in an instant. And you just go like, wow, this is one event that has changed my whole life, and this is going to be a long journey, long journey. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, Corinne, firstly, I have said this to you, but so sorry for your loss and what you've had to go through, because I've known you before, and I touched base with you during and now again, and it never goes away, does it? It's constantly there. And as you said, it totally shifts the trajectory of your own life and the roles that you play in identity. And we can have a loss, like we can have a person in our life, whether it's a grandparent or someone pass away, but like what you're saying here is there's just this layer upon layer upon layer of grief, and this compounding impact of grief, but not only grief but the trauma as well in so
Yeah.
many different areas. And I think it's even traumatic, just not just, but the whole shifting in roles within family, that's a trauma in itself. So
Yeah.
there's the big and the obvious trauma of the way in which your brother passed away, but there's all those other ones. And I guess in terms of writing this book, you're really trying to help people navigate that journey. And just hats off to you, because I've worked with lots of people over the years, and it doesn't mean that you've got it all worked out or that you're over it, because I don't believe anyone ever gets over something like this. But the way in which you've been able to offer that, and I guess channel that grief to be a gift for others, so that grief and that suffering is not wasted, I guess, is
Mm-hmm.
what I'm saying. It's a bizarre kind of thing, isn't it? And it's hard
Yeah.
to put words on, but I know that many people will be blessed through your writing. And I'm interested in just that concept of complex grief, because whether it's not necessarily a death, it could be a divorce,
Mm-hmm.
could be financial loss. Lots of people face complex griefs, and I think they don't actually put language to it, that's actually what's happening, and that makes the experience all the more overwhelming.
Yeah.
Because I've heard people say, "Oh, well, it's not like I've lost anybody," or "It's not like this has happened," or "I've been to war and now I have
Mm.
PTSD." We don't really validate, and I think you mentioned the word permission giving book,
Mm-hmm.
that we need to give people permission to actually, their experience is their experience,
Yeah.
and that those feelings and that experience needs to be validated and then navigated. Can you speak into, I guess, that idea of trauma coming from lots of different things and the compounding impact of that?
Yeah. And I think you're right, it is compounding. And what makes it complex, I think, is the ties to our identity.
Yeah.
And that's where, where you can really become all tangled up, or, you become a bit undone and things like that. But I guess it's where you are not, where it's unseen, where it might be, where somebody has had, and we'll take death for an example, where somebody has had an illness, and you've had that ability to prepare for something, and
Yes.
and it's almost a release, and going, okay, this is a natural, end to that. And as difficult as grief is in those circumstances, when the loss is sudden or traumatic, it adds those complexities to it. And so this is where we look at where there could be loss from property around natural disasters and things like that, and the other element to, I guess, trauma, or kind of something like an event, is often it's very public, the event.
Yes.
So we had a lot of media around us, like, for a long time, and coming out of the woodworks and things like that, just to get the story. And I remember one time my parents were doing a press conference, a media conference with the police in Parramatta. So that's like an hour away from where they live. And by the time they got back, there were news channels in their backyard.
Wow.
So
Gosh.
not even out the front of their place, but actually on their
In their
property.
in their backyard.
And
Wow. It's
what
very
was,
invasive, isn't it?
yeah, and what was really difficult about that time is, for 3 months, my parents' place was a crime scene, and they weren't even able to live in their own home. And I stayed with them. We lived in a hotel for 3 months, and just to kind of have that then invasive space in there. So it's like, it's just the unfairness, and the everyone kind of wants a piece of the story and things like that, and yet you've lost your person, and had it, and so, yeah. So anyway, going back to, sometimes, with natural disasters, it's a very public thing, or there's a collective
Well, there's a
trauma
community
there.
experience, isn't there?
Yeah,
Yes.
but then it's an individual loss as well. And so, if people are feeling it more than someone else, they might feel like they're not allowed to feel what they're feeling because someone else has got it together better. and things like that. So, you know, and you just hear about it when it's, say, you know, road trauma as well. And, you know, I'm just very reflective at the moment of the bus crash that happened in the Hunter Valley recently and how public that was, but that they're going to be 10 families of private loss there. And, you know, and then you have really high profile cases where people are very vocal about, you know, oh, they're full of forgiveness for the person who took their person, and then you get, if you're not there, then you get that guilt of going, oh well, I'm not as good of a human being if I can't forgive the person who took my brother, basically. So, you know, it really messes with your mind, and it really does. You know, where there's that element of an event, and then people are really interested in all of that. But I think what people really want, and this is what I've noticed, is that they want the good news story and they want the bounce back to happen.
Yes.
And for somebody who is grieving, that's almost a burden that's placed on them. And I think what needs to happen more in our society is we need to allow people to take as long as they need to be in their grief. And grief, I mean, we've got grief theories. We've got the Kubler-Ross theory of the stages of grieving. And interestingly, that was never really a process for people who have lost someone. It was designed originally for people who were dealing with their own illness and their own imminent death.
Yes.
And it's become whatever it's become. Yeah. And we've kind of allowed that to be the socially acceptable way to deal with grief, and kind of put parameters around, well, you should be here, or, you know, all this sort of stuff. And that's where, you know, we get words like closure and you know, time heals all wounds and things like that, which is so unhelpful.
Yes.
So unhelpful. So yeah.
No, it's true. I worked for many years at in a main hospital in Sydney doing oncology palliative care.
Right.
So I did a lot of that palliative care grief counselling with families there, and Kubler-Ross was a big model, but I would agree with you that doesn't necessarily translate into other areas. So
that's right. And it's not to say that doesn't exist and it has no value. It definitely does, but there's some really incredible grief theories out there, and there's some really I'm going to go back to the word, but permission giving theories that allow people to stay connected with their loved ones. And there's a really beautiful one that I think as Catholics we can probably intrinsically understand, which is continued bonds. And just continuing that relationship can exist, and it's a new relationship. And that was new to me. My relationship with my brother Jeffrey has changed in his death than what it was when he was alive. Like it's a very, very different relationship. And you know, I don't think I would, I know that I wouldn't have photos of my brother in my home, you know, for that sense, but, you know, or talk to him every day and things like that. But yeah, so continued bonds is something that you know, I think we deeply understand, because we have that modeled to us in our faith. And we look at that. I mean, we just look at, say, even Jesus and the gift of him giving us the Holy Spirit and things like that, in a sense, is that continued bond. And also even just our relationships with the saints and things like that, we can have, we know that there is this continuation of life and life-giving life beyond this world. And
No, that's beautiful, Corinne. I'd love to, I just hear from you. Perhaps what did you learn in this journey that, I mean, obviously that's packaged in your book, but what would be some of the key things as someone who's walked through grief, I guess, that you needed? And I ask this question because people listening will either be going through grief or they'll be supporting someone going through grief. So there's two different sort of questions there. There's what did
Yeah.
you need as a grieving person? And then I guess we can look at what can people do as support people, because
Mm.
I think you're right that so often people don't know what to say, and I find people tend not to say anything.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, I don't, my experience has been working with people just through my nursing, is it's much better to say something and perhaps get it wrong than to not say anything at all or
Yeah.
acknowledge the loss.
Yeah.
But then there's also, if we are going to say something and support people, like what is helpful and what is not. And so let's begin with, firstly, what did you learn? What did you need as a person going through grief? And I ask this because there'll be women listening to this who are navigating their own loss. It might
Of
be through
course.
marital loss,
Mm-hmm.
financial loss, mental health. It might be through death. What do we need to do to get ourselves through those seasons of grief?
Yeah. Thank you for bringing this up, because I think um, what happens is, thank you for saying, it's sometimes better to say something and get it wrong rather than not say anything, because it can be very isolating. And even when people say, oh, we just need some space or things like that, don't take that as as a way to give distance. Always, always, always connect with them, because I think, and I can only talk from my own experience, and I've got to say, writing the book was my process.
Mm.
It was
Yeah.
100% my process. There's characters in the book that reflect things that happened to me. There's nothing kind of made up in the imagination in that sense. It's all things that happened and that was said. And but yeah, I think for me the biggest I guess disappointment that I had around support was this feeling of being abandoned by
Okay.
those that I was really hoping would stand by me. And I did, it took me a really long time to work it out, but I did figure it out later that it was just a really hard thing for everyone to navigate. And people just didn't know what to do and what to say. So my advice, I guess what I needed was for a sense of love, just a real sense of, you are loved, we've got you, we're here if you need us, reach out, but we'll keep talking to you, like that sort of thing. I absolutely needed to feel like I was doing the right thing by staying connected, to Jeff. And one of the things that we did as a family was we named a star after Jeff, or we picked a star, and Mum picked a star, and it was one particular night, and we had this stargazing app so you could find out what the actual star was called.
Yes.
And so Mum picked the brightest star that she could see on the night, and the star app told us that it was the star at the location of M15, which was super significant because Jeffrey's birthday is May 15th.
Oh,
and so we were like, oh, okay, that's totally Jeffrey.
Yes.
And so that particular star was part of the constellation. It's the nose of the horse of the constellation Pegasus.
Okay.
And so a Pegasus has become something really significant to our family. And just the symbolism of it. And there's spoiler alert, there's a Pegasus on my book.
Oh, very nice.
So there's a Pegasus in my book.
That's why. Yeah, there's symbolism.
That's
Beautiful.
right. And so everything in there is very symbolic. But also, just as I said before, I had this mantra of they mean well, they mean well, they mean well. So I think just having this deep understanding that people really do mean well. They're not set out. If they're coming to you at your time of loss, they're coming to you because they do care and they don't really want to muck it up. So even if they say the wrong thing and it stings, it's that they really do mean well. So it's kind of just taking it with the intention that it's given, as opposed to what they actually say. And I think what I said before about that burden of the good news story or the bounce back, and just, don't rush having to have it all together and be capable and all of that sort of stuff. One of the things that was told to me many times, and still to this day, is you are so strong. And it's like, I never knew strength felt so weak, because this is not what I think strength is. So it's recognizing what they're seeing in you is this resilience or this tenacity or something to kind of keep going. I wholeheartedly believe that for me it was grace. I don't know how I got through some days. Don't know. Some days I was definitely carried. Some days, people helped me walk through it. Others I just don't know. And so I actually do mention that in the book and talk about this concept of transcendence. And that's what I mean, is this concept of we're being carried. We don't know how we're getting through, but we are. So to take that pressure off us to have to bounce back and what have you. Yeah. But advice to people, helping people going through grief is, as I said, just show up. That's probably, and everyone's going to be different. Like some people really like the pragmatic stuff and, having dinner cooked and things like that and bringing a meal over. But some people just want a sense of normal. Like I want to be invited to that party. I want to be able to laugh and not feel guilty. And, so I don't need to wallow all the time and things like that. So just always invite, always show up, always do that sort of thing. I think people are really afraid to mention the loved one's name around people.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's all they desperately want to talk about is that person. And not mentioning their name is not taking away the fact that person's gone. And sometimes just hearing someone say, Jeff, just goes, oh, he meant something to someone other than me, and thank you. And I saw recently friends of mine who lost their dad recently. A friend of theirs sent them a photo of their dad that they had never seen before. And so they're like, oh, they've got a new image of their dad that they never had. And for that one person, it was just them sharing a photo. But to the sisters here, they were like, oh my gosh, this is my dad. And you thought about my dad and you thought about me. And, it just made such a difference. Yeah, it meant so much. So, and like, I think we hear this one all the time. And this is not a new kind of mind-blowing thing to mention, but that first year is not necessarily the only hard year. And
I actually find that it's the second year that is the harder year. We always found that people who went through cancer and they went into remission, even though that first year was a year of treatment, it was actually the year that they went into remission that was much harder.
Wow.
And I found that sort of walking with people, it's that second year of grief after that first anniversary, because it becomes also permanent.
Yep.
And I think that's what's really challenging as well, that first year is made up of funeral, and if you've got other complexities dealing with that, for you it was a court case, and just those layers. But then once it becomes permanent, I think that's where but that's also the time where everybody goes away and goes back to their life. And
absolutely.
So there's that loss, even though I think people need to understand grief takes a very long time to walk through. And even though that first anniversary may have passed, that second year is even more critical.
It is, Karen, and I think it's exactly correct. And I think that first year is the first year without the person, and then the second, third, fourth, all that sort of stuff. That permanency is the absolute realization that this is now how it is, and that is never going to change, and that is devastating. And so I think if you've got somebody going through grief, or if you know somebody who has lost someone even a while ago, to just be super mindful of the significant dates. So it might be the anniversary, it might be their birthday, it might be something else that, to just acknowledge it and just, I'm thinking of you, or all that sort of stuff.
I've got a funny story for you. Not that this is funny, but my father-in-law passed away. It was 13 years ago. And his birthday is the 20th of June. But for some reason on the 10th of June, I got all confused. I was busy filming a project. So I texted my mother-in-law, just thinking and praying for you today on Paul's birthday. It's like, anyway, she wrote back and she said, oh, it's not till the 20th. And I was like, of course, I know that. So the 20th was a couple of days ago. I was like, hi, just say.
Me again.
Yeah, me again. But she goes, thanks for thinking of me. I said, well, I prayed for you anyway twice.
Yeah, exactly.
But even 13 years on, I find that I transcribe those things each year, you know, the birthdays or the moments where, say, a loved one may have gone into hospital and not come out.
That's
like
it.
I really try to acknowledge that in people's life because because you're reliving it.
Absolutely.
And when everyone else has moved on, there is that sense of isolation. And I think, you know, we are created in relationship for relationship. This is where we thrive. This is our purpose as human persons. Like that we need that community, and it's so important to just come around people in whatever they're going through. Yeah.
Absolutely. And just I mean, there's something incredible that we took from the loss of Jeff, which is when Jeffrey died. So Jeffrey went straight to Royal North Shore Hospital, which was it's probably about an hour and 20-minute drive from where we are. And he spent 3 days, 2.5 days on life support. And the first doctor who spoke to us when we got there told us that, you know, there's 20% chance of him surviving. So we knew in that moment, but what we were able to do was look at the aspect of organ donation. And we had the Donate Life care team come and talk to us and talk to us about what the consent that they need from family as well. And what Jeffrey was able to do with his organs whilst he passed away was his organs, his heart and both of his kidneys were able to be donated, and he was able to save 3 people's lives. And so therefore 3 people were no longer terminal. 3 people now got a second chance at life. And to me, that in all honesty, that was the only thing that we had that kind of allowed us to make meaning or make sense or something out of this. Because I think when you lose someone or something and you're going through grief, is you try and make meaning from it. You need answers, you need, you know,
you need meaning to cope with
absolutely.
Yes.
And so if you can create that for you in that sense, you know, it just can settle some part of the pain. And so we've got that. And that's there's actually this book is called Learn to Fly. It's the title actually came before the book. I knew it was always going to be called Learn to Fly. So it's taken from the song Blackbird from the Beatles. But there's a little blackbird in my book. And
beautiful.
It's not a character in the book, but it is featured 3 times, and that is the 3 people that Jeffrey saved. And so, like I said, it's so much my process that every single page of that is significant, and yet it's also been a gift to other people. And it's not even just the people that are in my circle that just wanted to support the book. And I do want to say one thing about kind of the overwhelming nature of what happened with the book. And that was I did a Kickstarter campaign because I've self-published. So I had to somehow fund it myself. And so I did a Kickstarter, and I don't know if you know much about Kickstarter, but you basically set a target and you have like a time frame. And so they recommend to do a time frame around 30 days. And so I did that. And they say that it allows you to have momentum, but it's also not too long that people kind of lose interest. And so I had a content creator, that I had come along and helped me out, and we had a schedule of all different kind of ways to get people to jump on board the Kickstarter for the 30 days. It was pretty slick. Anyway, my Kickstarter was fully funded in 8 hours.
8 hours. That's
so
amazing.
What was I going to do with the rest of the 30 days?
That's incredible.
So, yeah. And so it said straight away to me, it wasn't just needed. I've got a whole heap of people who are cheering me on. It was
who just like
this,
you.
this needs to be out there.
Yeah.
And so that was the kind of the pre stuff. And then afterwards, the amount of people that have contacted me after reading it. And I had one of my friends contact me and said, I bought the book for my nana because she just lost her husband. And she has written me a card to give to you. So next time I see you, I need to give you the card. Anyway, the card is so beautiful. And basically it says that ever since she got the book, she has read it every single day. And like, I don't know this person at all. And just the impact that it's having. And one of the things that I really wanted to make sure that came out of this book is that it was a beautiful thing for somebody to pick up. So it's beautifully illustrated by another wonderful Catholic woman, special, Kate Ong. Yes. And so her artwork is delicious. Beautiful. It's so amazing. And it is a book for adults. And I think some people look at it and think that it's a children's book because it's an illustrated book. But that's the point.
Yes,
when I was in those really early days and those active grief days, people want to do things and give you a lot of things. So I was given a lot of tools. I was given a lot of books that I still haven't read to this day. And some books that I would pick up and read the first line and be like, no, not doing that. But it was the children's books around grief that was so beautiful and just captivating and just made sense, because everything is harder and everything needs to be more simple in those times. And so I was like, why don't we have this for adults? And that's really that's how it's come about.
So you've written it for yourself essentially, but it's been a huge blessing for everybody and such a gift, Corinne. So look, tell me, where can people find or get a copy of this beautiful book?
Yeah, absolutely. So I do have a website. It's learntoflybook.com, and on there it has a link to all the different places that you can buy it, but you can look on Amazon and things like that. It's listed Amazon internationally, so wherever in the world you want to buy the book, you can get it from there.
You can. Fantastic. Well, I'll put a link in the show notes and really encourage people. I'm a big believer in having some books, because even if we might not go through this journey ourselves, chances are we will encounter somebody who does. And the purpose of our life is to be a gift. So if we can give somebody something that's helpful, I often have a few books on my shelf where I buy multiple copies that I just have so I can give to someone if I meet them and they're going through a difficult time. So I'll be getting a couple of extra copies of your book. But thank you so much, Corinne, for your time. Thank you for the gift of being so vulnerable with your story and sharing that. I know that you haven't done that intentionally. It's just sort of unfolded the way it has. But as you said, so many people are just so blessed, and it's become such an anchor and a tool for people. So thank you.
Yeah, not a problem. Thank you.
Ladies, I hope that conversation was insightful. If you are going through your own grief, or you know of someone who is navigating that season of life, can I invite you to check out Corinne's website? The book is found on www.learntoflybook.com. Really encourage you to get a copy and just have it on your bookshelf for people who you might meet throughout your life, that you can offer this book as a beautiful resource too. Ladies, next week we are starting off a new cohort of the Catholic Women's Masterclass, and I'd love you to come and check it out. This masterclass has been such an incredible journey of transformation for so many women over the last couple of years. It's really about learning how to develop some rhythms of renewal, going back to the basics and building your life really intentionally so that you can flourish and grow into the fullness of who God has created you to be as a woman. If you'd like to find out more about this masterclass, you can find out more by visiting the website www.geniusproject.co and just check out the masterclass page. You can also send me an email, karen@geniusproject.co. If you've liked what you've heard on the Genius podcast, can I invite you to do me a small favor? Head on over to the platform that you're listening to this podcast on and leave a review and a rating. This only takes a couple of moments, but it really helps to support the work of the Genius Project and spread the word of the Genius podcast. Until next week, ladies, I hope you have a beautiful week. God bless you, and I look forward to you joining me next week on the Genius podcast.